I mean,
Yeah.
it's you can't see it. It's it's tied to my desk, but it's just a $15 USB mic, rocket fish, right?
Yeah, this is. I got my fancy Yeti, and then this thing.
Yeah.
So are you just using that for sound right now? I mean,
Yep.
to listen?
Yep.
One of these days, I'll go and get the XLR to a USB converter. I have a AKG microphone, AKG 320.
Okay.
Which back in the day was considered a pretty good mic. When I used to do bars and stuff like that, which was a long, long time ago.
I mean, it's still $250. It's still $250.
Well, it cost me $250 when I bought it, and that was 1981. So.
Oh, okay. That's pretty cool. It's $250 used on reverb.com.
Yeah. So yeah, they're pretty good mics, right? I mean, when you're playing in bars, you're either using the SM57s, which was considered the standard, or you're using the AKGs, right? Those were the two big name brands. So,
yep.
But so I mean, it's got really good response and everything like that. But I have to get the adapter for it because when you're feeding everything into the soundboard, and it's all XLR.
Got it.
Yeah. So I figured rather than spend $150 on a good USB mic, I'd rather spend the $140 on the XLR to USB converter.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go. Is anyone else joining us, Andrew, do you think?
I don't know. It's a good question.
Because Lori said she couldn't. She's going to be on a plane, I guess, to Montreal.
Yeah, Dan also mentioned he couldn't.
Yeah.
Couldn't join. And I don't know of anybody else who has RSVP'd, so.
I can just go over kind of what I've been working on. And I guess
that'd be cool.
What's in the pipe, right?
Yeah.
But I'm sure you noticed some repos get cloned now when you do a motion create, or when you updated RubyMotion.
Mm-hmm.
So,
or when you rake.
yeah. So the rake, I can change some of those things to to not pull down or hit GitHub every time. So let's see. You should now have a directory under your home called .RubyMotion, and that's where all the things will be. So RubyMotion command and then RubyMotion templates are both under that directory right now. And basically, I'm moving all the RubyMotion templates outside of the core Ruby release because it's so simple to fix a template, but it's more expensive to go through the entire build process to get that up there. So that was one of the primary reasons to go ahead and extract that out.
Makes sense.
And then same thing with RubyMotion command. Basically, that's another extension point, right? Doctor is going in there. And then the final thing that's happening is there should be a under. I haven't pulled it out yet, but RubyMotion data will be the final thing that will be pulled out, and that's all the bridge support files. So those things are going to be again separate from RubyMotion. So it makes it again straightforward to update these things as needed. So an example would be like SQLite bridge support files. Instead of having those generated every time, those could be packaged in and cached, and then any of the more interesting / large frameworks out there can have their bridge support files cached. There are High Sierra changed a few things from bridge support. There might be some hand-rolled bridge support files for ARKit, specifically around SIMD, which is basically all the vector 3 and vector 4 structures. So again, this is one of those ways where we'll just generate it once and then we won't have to worry about it. So those are the three big things that are getting extracted. Outside of that, RubyMotion templates. We can look at real quick. We can look at the iOS template.
There is one thing in the base Motion Create that has bugged me for a while.
Okay.
I haven't filed a bug report on this, and I meant to. It's probably something that I should go in and take a look at and see if I can fix, because it's just a rake thing, and I've done tons of stuff with rake. But you know, in Rails, if you go on GitHub and create the repo and then git clone it down, so you got essentially just the base directory and maybe a git ignore and a readme. In Rails, if you do then the Rails create, it says, oh, that directory is already there. Okay, do you want to continue? And then just let you go.
Confirmation.
Motion fails.
yeah. It'll say the directory is created, and we're not gonna let you.
Yeah, it just aborts, and my workflow has always been going git create the empty repo first, then
no, it makes sense.
Yeah. And then so like, you know, I generate the git ignore, or at least the start of a git ignore, and I generate the readme, and I might generate a license file, and having those things in there, you know, just in the base directory, and then having it not fail on me would be handy.
Right. So
that should be easy enough to fix, but anyways.
Yep. So I will do you know where those commands are located? I mean, just
not quite. I haven't dug in. I've looked a couple of times at the rake commands, but not much. Yeah,
so I'll put them in RubyMotion command basically, but that's where I'll put them. Right now they should be under like library RubyMotion, lib, and then there's whatchamacallit. There is the commands folder that has the create.rb command, and that's where that's located. But I will be pulling that out, and then we'll be able to extend it like you mentioned, right?
Yeah.
So those kind of things will just come in. But I think those are the largest things that are that I'm working on, or that I've worked on this past since we last met. I am also working on for actually 2 startups, basically getting it to where you have a turnkey wrapped web app. I know we talked about that before. So I've got the iOS in place. I've got the WK web UI, WK web view in place with all the camera functionality, and like a sample Rails app that shows how you do file upload, you know, from the camera and everything. And then I've got the Android side working together. So I'm going to package that up as like an alpha thing, and that's going to show up under RubyMotion templates once I hash all that out.
Is that layered on top of Flow?
So right now, all I'm trying to do is Flow is about native cross-platform apps. This is more about just wrap a website, get it out there.
Oh, right? Okay. So this is completely different then.
Yeah. So the premise here is that you have a responsive website, a Rails backend. You want to have some kind of app store presence. This lets you wrap your web app very quickly, have an app store presence with push notification, with seamless login, and with push notifications, seamless login, access to local storage, so I could persist some stuff there for you, and then crash and engagement analytics. So the premise here is like, is it worth investing past this hello world wrapped application? So get it out there and then measure. And then if it's worth going more native, that is the next part of the story, right? So that's the premise behind this.
Okay.
It's orthogonal to Flow at this point.
I tried to do something with Flow where I was going to see how it worked on Mac OS, and it don't.
Yeah, like as far as the direction of Mac OS, it just comes down to the people that are contributing to that side of it. I have no strong opinions either way. I mean, if it can work, great. If it can't, then it can't. In my head, I'm thinking a mobile UI or like a mobile layout is something that can be consistent potentially across two devices. But how do you create? How do you bridge the OS 10
yeah,
gap, right?
I'm fine with that. It was more of a observation than a critique.
Yeah.
And I was looking at it. I'm sorry, Amir. Go ahead.
No, I was saying like, and when Flow was initially released, that was confusing to me too, as far as the OS 10 offering on the Flow side. It would make more sense if it was maybe like OS 10 and Windows, but obviously that's not a thing. So it didn't make sense to see OS 10 in there. On the other OS 10 stuff, 5.7, the starter kit includes 10.13. So you have Mac OS 11, whichever the latest is, and Android 23. So you get that out of the box now. So all three offerings. So
I haven't looked at the starter kit, and in all honesty, I'll admit that I know that the price went up before you took hold of it, and you may recall, both of you might have been in the community at the time. You may recall that there was certain amount of whinging about the price and how come I have to pay for RubyMotion? Why can't this all be open source and stuff like this?
Yep.
And I was looking at it and I'm going, it's like $175. I mean, come on.
Yeah. I did reintroduce the indie plan, so you can do the 20 a month. But yeah, it's like you can spend the week to figure out how to make a wrapped website, or you can take those 40 hours, put them somewhere else, buy a RubyMotion license, and then have a wrapped website in one command. You decide, right? So, yep, can't do anything about that. But that's really all I have on my end.
You were talking about a roadmap sometime early in the year that you were going to be at the last time we met. You were talking about perhaps putting together something of a longer term roadmap about where you were going with some things. Is that solidified at all?
The primary thing that's solidified has been the REPL is planned to be open source this year. I'm pushing for that to at least be open source this year. I'm carving out as much of RubyMotion that can be updated out of band. So those are the immediate roadmap things. And yeah, I mean that's really it. Like there's going to be more performance work. Android is going to be on the roadmap also, specifically Android 26 with its 64-bit support. So those are the primary things on there.
I haven't tried Android as yet, because I don't have an Android device, and it hasn't been high on my list of priorities of things to do.
Right.
Although I was looking for it at some point. How is the Android support?
I mean, I'm on Android right now, so like
So you find that you don't, as far as you're concerned, it's on par with iOS then?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, the biggest issues you're going to have with Android are going to be low-end devices. So some of the things that I had to change in a darkroom were primarily around my data structures. So yeah, everything works fantastically on Samsung Galaxy S8, S6, and then all the other stuff. But then I have this I actually got a low-end Motorola G BS device to test on. And it just came down to like the data structures. I had like the map was in a hash of 3,600 array values, tuples, right, for XY position, and it barely did anything on the high end devices, but the low end devices, that was a big deal. So I had to change that to a hash of 60 by 60, right? And those are the primarily pain points you're going to hit. Is there are just some things on the low end devices that just won't perform because they're powered off of what I power my toaster off of, and that's just it.
I ask because I see the occasional comment about you know, I can't get this to work. Whereas you know, when you see those sorts of things on the iOS or on the Mac side, it's well, have you looked at this, or you know, and so I don't know if they're, because the person doing it is decided that they're going to learn RubyMotion, Android programming, and then the base Java libraries all at once.
Yeah,
you know,
it is most likely most of the time that there are JNI issues that still crop up that are hard to peg down, and the foreign function interface to C is something that is essentially undocumented at this point. So that's one of the biggest issues with Flow right now, is that foreign function FFI to Objective C works really well because that's just how it works. We use the Objective C runtime, but foreign function interface to C through Android on Java is not as nice, right? And it's not well documented, and it's not something that has been really used outside of Flow. And so that's where all the gnarly bits are. But if you're using just straight Android stuff, you're good, right? So there's still some work that needs to be done on Android to provide a means to use a RubyMotion library as a class library. That's something that is possible on iOS. I'm getting a template prepared for that, Andrew. And yeah, so the Android side is going to take some work to get that working. But I generally like the idea of like dipping your toes and having a RubyMotion library referenced in generally an iOS project, right? That story works. Just got to flesh out the template for that. And work needs to be done to do that for Android. And as far as like year-long roadmaps, I'm not big on that because anything can change.
Okay.
Right?
But well, you had mentioned talking about presenting, you know, where things were going and stuff like that, and so
So as far as like the high-level principles, or I hate the word manifesto, so I'd probably say guiding principles of RubyMotion. I put that inside of the forum. So a press release will come out with regards to the guiding principles of like what differentiates RubyMotion. Get that on paper, you know, get that on the website with the check mark saying that this is why you would choose RubyMotion over something else. And those guiding principles will be the loose guidance for future development, basically.
I know there was some talk going back and forth with I mean, I found it a little bit odd because the person said, "Oh, well, is it dead because you know there's nothing on Twitter?" Now, of course, I so seldom go on Twitter myself.
Yeah,
that it's like you know, and at one point I followed Laurent. I think I still follow Laurent, but you know, although there's lots of wonderful pictures about beer and sushi, there was never a whole lot about RubyMotion.
Right. Yeah.
Anyways.
And again, from my perspective, it's all about retention, taking care of those that are using it right now, and letting the community grow organically from there. Right? RubyMotion sponsored. Like, there's no. Yeah. So
I guess the thing is, are there some things that perhaps you know you've looked at, like your manifesto essentially said that. Although, like, it's not your primary revenue stream, essentially.
It's comparable to what I'm making.
Sorry?
Yeah, it's comparable to what I'm making on my apps. So the revenue stream, the point with the revenue stream is that it is just essentially icing on the cake, right?
Yeah.
My products are what sponsor RubyMotion in its entirety. Yeah.
And what I was thinking of is I mean, is there some way that the community of us could help with some of that? Like, is like even something as simple as posting tweets, you know, when new releases are out there. I don't know if you do that because
no, I don't.
And that might even just help.
Yeah, I think, I mean, honestly, the best thing, and it's like it's already being done, is anytime someone brings up that question, any one of those like common questions, there's always someone that says exactly what I would have said, right? And yeah, outside of that, I am more interested in making successful apps with those people and startups and organizations that I'm already collaborating with, right? And of course, the existing RubyMotion community and what they're doing. So
yeah,
from a growth standpoint, I also mentioned that in the write-up was, looking at charities. I'm looking at helping those kind of things, alumni organizations for sponsorship, and basically getting that quote unquote new life from people that are just starting to code, right? As opposed to trying to convince old people like me that something else is like more useful, right? It's just we're all set in our ways, and we're not going to do it.
Obvious choice for the old person in the room.
Grumpy old men like me. But yeah, so from that perspective, I'm doing spring semester starting up. I've got a lot of workshops in the UT, University of Texas Academia, already set up, and you're going to see that. You're going to see those new questions coming from a bunch of college students are like, help, I'm trying to build a mobile thing. How do I do this? Right. Because when they join the workforce, that's the big thing, right? And these are all seniors. So graduating seniors that I'm working with.
There were some points I know that were raised that were like, for instance, the docs and the sample apps and how that, and so I pulled that down and we had created the additional channel, which I don't think you've joined yet, Amir. Right?
Another channel? Gee.
Come on, just on the docs, so that just a closed one, so that those of us that were going to work on because there's probably about 4 or 5 of us that specific things about the docs. And I guess the thing is from my standpoint, I think that there's some things that we could do with those docs that would make them good, that would help. Long after I joined this Slack group, I found out about the Ruby on Rails Slack group, which is actually a very good resource. I mean, there's good people on it there's people there that dedicate their time to helping people that have some questions that, from my own standpoint, is really, that's what you're asking? Right. Sometimes the answers are, well, have you read the Rails guides?
Right.
And in reality, the Rails guides go a pretty long way to helping explain how to do a lot of stuff.
Right.
Until you start getting it deeper and deeper and deeper. And that is probably something that we're missing.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've got these things we've got the sample apps. Some of them are old. Some of them are dependent on things. Some of them, I've accumulated myself a library of samples of the things that people have done. And occasionally I have problems, right? Because, for instance, if they have old interface builder stuff in there, because some of the guys, when they were doing things, originally just did it all with interface builder. Right. You can't open it up, right? It won't compile. And when you're trying to see how to do things, that causes problems. So getting those brushed up to date probably would help. And so I'm hopeful that I can at least, from my own standpoint, I was hoping that I could do like a page a month or something like that.
Yeah, and I mean the other, excuse me, the other idea there would be there could be just a subsection under templates that are the sample apps, right? There's no reason that we can't just have like, here is your Twitter clone, here is your Instagram clone, here's your whatever clone, and then just have those, not necessarily sample apps, but reference implementations that show like, here is how you build something that is non-trivial, right?
Yeah.
My primary criticism with the sample apps that are some of the sample apps on there is like, I have in all my iOS development, I have done very little with like CG graphics. Like one of the Apple sample apps is like the circle layout. It's like, it is rare that anyone will ever draw circles straight from the graphics context, right? But that's one of the sample apps.
Well, I think that comes from the Apple sample apps, though, because that was one of the original Apple, the
right, which
window,
yeah, which is fine. But with the whole guiding principle stuff, it's like, I want working. I don't want demoware, right? I want things that you actually end up using in your day-to-day stuff, right? So it's nice, right? But how useful is it? And that's generally what I've seen with the sample apps that are there. So I agree, right? I agree with you, and I think having some of that baked into maybe like a sample apps section inside of the templates, so you don't even go to a website, you just type in Motion Help, and it's like, here are the templates. Here's a template that shows XYZ, ABC, and all that stuff, and you just new it up and hit rake, and that's it.
Yeah. Well, right. I mean, the ability to clone the documentation is useful as well. I have often found that I end up on a plane, and paying $10 for 3 hours of Wi-Fi just sticks in my craw. Yeah. And I like writing code on a plane, but you hit that point where it's like, oh, I need to see the docs. They're only on the website. Right. I've got Capelli's Dash, and at one point you actually could get a module with the RubyMotion, but Laurent got a cease and desist from Apple. Yeah.
For the docs.
And so like I've got everything loaded into there that I can, and that's sort of an approach. I like the idea of having the stuff so that you can bring it down and then you can review it without actually having to hit a website, which is something to consider with the rake stuff too, that you don't want it to fail just because you don't have an internet connection at that point.
It does not fail. It will try and time out, and it will eat the exception and write it out to the console. So yeah, I made sure that it doesn't hinder your ability to create a new project. Additionally, with the sample apps, documentation's not fun, but a potentially interactive sample is something that is more interesting, right? So if you do rake new sample camera, it could say, hey, this isn't working. Go to your rake file, add these two values in it, and then a new view controller shows up and it says, look, now you can use your camera, right? So those kind of like interactive tutorials where you basically code inside of the iOS app to learn a specific feature is something that's really compelling to me, right? And I think that beats the socks off of any kind of just uninteractive documentation, right?
It might be easier to maintain. There's a combination of both.
No, I understand. Yeah.
I'm not as well versed enough in the Apple libraries that I still dig through the documentation looking for things, right? And for all the warts that it has, it's better than some of the other things that I've used in the past, and it isn't all that bad. So you know, having a, I find using Dash makes it easier to search those libraries too, which is one of the reasons why I, you know, paid him the upgrade after he got kicked out of the App Store. So, but and he's actually doing a lot better now. Apparently, I saw a thing where he posted to his not hard numbers, but he posted where he was doing, and I think he's doing about twice as well as he was when he was in the App Store.
Oh, that's good.
So it's a useful utility, right? If you build something useful, they will come. It's probably the one utility that most developers will actually pay for.
Yep.
So I had a question about the move with the templates. I was doing something recently and I saw this message saying like, hey, by the way, you got to move some stuff where to update your rake file to
point to the template directory.
To a different place now.
Yep.
Is that necessary, or can we symlink something so that it just works, just continues to work?
No, no, because the templates may not be cloned, right? So if I try to, I mean, I guess I could quote unquote silently fail, but basically I can't remove the existing templates inside of the RubyMotion directory. So if you reference only the templates in the RubyMotion directory, you get that message. And then when you reference the templates, the path from the .rubymotion folder, it monkey patches that and then redefines that method, so it no longer gives you that deprecation notice. So if you look at library RubyMotion /library /RubyMotion lib project, you're going to see that exact same hierarchy there, and basically all those things get redefined inside of the ios.rb. So I can change it. I mean, I can update that to do those kind of things, but it's one of those. The issue is that the templates are going to evolve, right? So whatever's currently in the RubyMotion directory is in there. It will not be patched. It will not be monkey patched. It will not be changed. You decide when you want to move forward, and it's not going to happen automatically for you right now. We can change that, but that's kind of how I worked with that.
Did you go and get all the templates, Amir, that you know of?
That I know of. Yep, all of them are in there.
Did you get the menu status bar template?
Whatever was in the private repo. So
okay.
It is not synchronized.
Yeah,
it is not synchronized with the public GitHub repo.
This was another one that was out there. There was a few odd templates, like you know. So, for instance, MotionKit had templates, but this one was for doing Mac OS development and would be probably handy to put it. I was wondering if you ran that down. I should go and take a look at what's in there, and then you know, that was one that I thought was, because it was a template for. There was a few wonky things that you had to set up for building a status bar, like a menu bar only app on Mac, which is, you know, a really handy thing to do. And the guy in England that was writing the one on the RubyMotion on Mac books, that I can't remember his name off the top of my head.
Yeah, I mean, if you throw a GitHub issue in there into that repo, I can pull it over.
Okay.
Yep.
That's one of those templates that's very handy to sort of have when people are asking for, you know. I don't know if he continues to do much with RubyMotion or whatnot. I think it's hard to tell.
Cool.
So I've got something I've been working on. I'm not sure if you guys are interested in
Please.
seeing it. But I had this idea. I haven't really touched this project for a couple months, so it's a little rusty, a little crufty. But basically, I was interested in experimenting with some different kinds of templates.
Okay.
Building like template-based components, and specifically using ERB, because ERB is a Ruby friendly templating language. Because with the like React Native, for example, they've got the JSX syntax where you've got the sort of HTML syntax that you use, but it's not really HTML. It ends up being transpiled into some JavaScript.
Yep, that's correct.
So I was trying to imitate that sort of a feature, and I made a little bit of progress on that. Not a whole lot. Let me share my screen. Let's see, screen share. All right, can you see that?
Yep.
All right, let's see, where am I? So essentially, I'm trying to create some HTML. Let me switch over here. Here. It's an example. I've got a template, and I want to be able to have an HTML-like syntax for defining UI elements, and I also want to be able to do some Ruby, like ERB tags in here.
Okay.
So obviously, this isn't going to work, or at least I don't want this to work at runtime. I want this to be a build type of compile this template into something that can be executed at runtime.
Okay.
So started experimenting with some different ways of parsing some ERB syntax, and never done this sort of thing before. So I started looking into a library called Treetop and a library called Parselet, and made a little bit more progress with Parselet. So essentially, you with Parselet, you define a parser, and it has this syntax for I don't know, tokenizing different things that it finds as it's parsing. So it comes across elements and text and ERB tags and spaces, and each of these has their own basically regex that it uses to match against these different tags. And I started by copying some example that already existed and tweaking it. And
so, does it have to look like HTML?
It doesn't have to. That's right. I was sort of just going off of that ERB would be a familiar syntax for defining these.
You can run anything through ERB. Like I mean, if it actually is ERB. I've done some stuff with creating Rails generators. I actually generate a database based on an interface I've been working on an interface, healthcare interface definition called FHIR, which some of the stuff is kind of complex. But at any rate, ERB kind of does that to sort of fit in, like, with the stuff, but you don't actually, it doesn't actually have to be XML-ish. And as a further note, there was somebody that built a library in Swift where you defined UIs using an XML syntax, and it had a live reloading thing. I think I spoke to you about it the last time, Amir.
Mm-hmm.
It looked cool, but it was Swift once again, and we were talking about different languages and how many different DSLs are there now in Swift for defining your UI and so forth like that, which some people were saying was a problem. But I understand that at least with an HTML based thing, it's kind of, for many of the people in the Rails community, it's what we're familiar with.
Yeah, that was really the goal, is just to use something that other Ruby developers would be familiar with. And that, this is ERB syntax for writing the Ruby code. And that's really the point of it. Like, it doesn't have to be HTML for defining the elements necessarily, but it's the ERB part of it that is the Ruby part of it. And this could be some other kind of templating language, like handlebars or something like that. But going with ERB because that's familiar to Rubyists. And so the goal is that this template, we don't actually evaluate this ERB until at runtime when we want to, when we have these variables available to us.
Right.
So it's a runtime evaluation of the template, not a build time?
At build time, the goal is to create these executable templates. So it's not just taking this HTML and
right. So I guess what I'm saying is that why not just create a Ruby class, right? That can then be consumed by something else that creates the templates.
Create a Ruby class that gets consumed by the templates?
By the template generator, right, during build time.
Well, then it sounds like you'd essentially be writing Ruby code that doesn't need to go through that templating process.
So I put something in the Meetup channel. Right. It's this is just tuples of tuples, right?
Right.
That's your hiccup stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
The issue with the reason JSX exists is because JavaScript is horrible at constructing these kind of DSLs. Ruby is not. Right.
Yeah. Sure. So, I mean, this is totally fine if this is what you're trying to do, and this would be a relatively simple DSL for defining something like that.
Right, and you're right. It'd be build time, right? You don't want to do this at runtime. You could slurp that up into an array and then traverse that hierarchy. So instead of trying to do parsing of essentially markup, you have the array. You have your Ruby constructs, right? So it removes that entire markup parsing phase altogether. And again, it's because Ruby is a language that's very amicable to these kind of DSLs.
Yeah.
Yep. And with Rails, the ERB stuff is really important. ERB in general is important for Rails and even RubyMotion, is because we have to generate files, right, that look exactly like the template, except for a couple of things that are in there that are replaced.
Well, and also with Rails, the idea is you're ultimately generating HTML.
Right.
Which, from the starting point, I actually don't like using Haml because it doesn't look enough like what I'm trying to produce when I'm building Rails.
Yeah, and I would imagine that and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Andrew, but the executable template probably is a lot of assuming it's iOS only, it's probably a lot of Objective-C code, right? You'd be constructing your UI buttons and potentially auto layouts and stuff. Is that an accurate statement?
So the goal would be to create a platform agnostic
Okay, yep, that's fine.
thing. So essentially, I've got this really ugly code here that takes this sample ERB and it generates some stuff here. So if I run this script, we can see that it starts out with this ERB. Right. It gets interpreted into this tree, and then I reconstruct the this tree as Ruby code.
Right.
So we are basically turning this syntax into something that we can save for later, and then the idea is that this would get at build time. This would get
right
added as some file that you can access
right.
to run your code. So then here's an example controller where I've got this this variable on my controller here. I generated that template, and if I wanted to render my template, ultimately I ended up doing something where I can just reference the template name, or it'd happen automatically. And then this would be like the library that would that you could use to render these templates. So these, assuming that this is what was generated by that template generator, then we could, in iOS, we'd end up making UI labels and UI buttons, but it would be in a syntax that could be cross-platform. So.
Yep.
So this is my ERB experiment, and the part that I didn't get to yet was actually doing the build time linking,
right.
Which I think we talked about at some point that it's possible to do that, but I don't know of any RubyMotion projects that have any sort of like build pipeline type of tooling built in. But I know of a lot of JavaScript or even Rails projects that have like this asset pipeline sort of thing where files get translated into something else.
The thing about that, Andrew, is because I was actually looking for something for that at one point. I had written my own image assets generator, so it would take a singular image and then generate all the different sizes that I need. You know, and we spoke about that a little bit when we need to create the XC assets file and so forth. And I was looking at how to make that like a build dependency, so that you could add that to the build dependency tree. And I didn't dig too far into it because it was, at the time it was just create my own rake target, stick it in the rake file, and then I'll run the rake target before I do my actual build. But you know, having something so that if you just change the source asset, and then it would generate everything from that, having to be able to add that as a hook to the build would be handy. I'm not exactly sure if that's exposed at all, or if that build process is not intended right now. It's probably doable. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's all in the templates. So if you go to the RubyMotion applied and go to ios.rb, you can see exactly what's being done there.
So you could just add your stuff as a pre-dependency to one of the other dependencies in the rake file? Yeah.
Yep.
Which would then mean you could chain it in. Yeah. It's not automatic quite like what you're looking for, Andrew, but it's makes it doable.
Yeah, and like it's one of those things where it will evolve and we'll codify it, and then there'll be something that's push deeper into the bells. and more available throughout, right? But just a quick thing, I can look real quick.
While you're looking, I will be right back.
Mm-hmm. After these messages, we'll be right back. I'll put this in the Meetup channel.
All right, I'm back.
I just put a link reference in the Meetup Slack.
I'll share my screen again just so
Yep.
people can see what it is if they're looking.
Yep, so the rake device and rake simulator, that's line 67 and 73. And they both reference this builder construct, right, which is also in the RubyMotion templates.
You have pre-build actions. You know, a standard way that we could do this is we could have either a hook in pre-build actions, an empty def that gets called that you could then overwrite within your rake file, which would be a very easy way to do that. We could put a couple of hooks in, almost like a dependency injection sort of idea.
Yep.
Which might actually be useful for, you know, for if we have things that we're doing with things that to customize our build process. That's something to take a look at.
So one thing,
there's
Motion Project app that I could also bring into this area because everything references app, right? That's your
yeah.
So that's something that I can potentially extract out and give everyone access to also. So I'll make a mental note of that.
So this build task, this rake task, or namespace build.
Yep.
There's this function in here called pre-build actions, which gets triggered when this rake task is triggered. And in this rake task, there's a assume remove this file, info plist, and then
yeah. So if you look at the builder, you can see
directories.
the intricacies of exactly how everything's packaged up.
Have you done much with Rake, Andrew?
A little bit, yeah. I've definitely customized some Rake tasks and hooked into.
I've done tons of stuff with Rake. I had a whole XSLT generation process where I was actually running Saxon from Rake and stuff like that because it was easier to build the custom things. It as opposed to Ant. My build process stuff goes back decades. It's starting with the original Make and you know, building custom targets in Make and stuff like that. So Rake is actually pretty handy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in this case, as of today, it seems like in order to achieve this, I'd have to hook into, or basically override the existing Rake task in order to run my own pre-built actions.
Yeah, and as long as you pipe back into these two values, you're good.
You probably want it to execute before what's in pre-build actions executes.
Well, at some point before it actually builds and launches.
Yeah.
Yeah, so default call simulator. So the default Rake task is what calls line 67.
Yep. Now instead of this line here, I'm supposed to be referencing.
You add both. You just add both of them.
Shift RubyMotion lib and
yep. And you just put that under, and you're good to go.
So you add that to your Rake files, and then if the directory doesn't exist, it creates it. Is that what happens with the latest version?
Yeah, it basically just clones it down.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I was cloning as I was running this Rake task, like right before.
Mm-hmm.
One of these. There it was.
Yep.
Rake, and then all of a sudden I see this. But, I didn't know that was going to happen.
Yeah, but it's just a one-time.
I guess it's fine because I'm going to be.
Is it just a one-time thing, Amir, or does it do regular checks?
It just does a get. It does a get fetch, right?
Okay. Okay.
Yep. And if the fetch fails, then it just uses whatever you have.
Yeah.
I guess this is fine because it's going to be referencing this every time I build.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess if there's any bug fixes, I'll want to automatically get those.
Yeah, exactly. You'll automatically get bug fixes, but sometimes you're going to want to freeze that.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I mean, the pull requests I accept obviously are going to be very, very,
Yeah.
yeah. It's a thing, right? We don't want to break stuff.
I just have that production sense, right? I don't want my build to pull things down unless I want to pull things down, sort of idea.
I understand. If you look at, there is an environment variable that you can set that says just use this directory from here on out.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was going to ask if we had something like that. That would be good. But yeah.
I can.
Thanks, Amir.
You're welcome.
Normally, you're out in front of these things, anyways. So. I'm dealing with another build process for this specification, and it goes and pulls things down, and then it generates files that you have to remember to check in, or else your build will fail on the CI server. And
that is awesome. I love that.
Yeah, it's just all so I'm running this build, and there's this list of files that change that I know I got to check in, and then other files have changed. And I go, I didn't change those. I'm not checking them in. You know? And I think I'm one of the few people that recognize that this thing is actually broken because it does stuff like that. It's just oh. Aggravating. So I have this fear about automatically pulling things down during the build, and but yeah, getting it to update with the latest updates is handy, right? I understand it's kind of a 6 of one, half dozen the other. People are going to want the latest, because if you patch something, it's like, okay, they're going to want it and stuff like that.
Yeah, and that was something like with the new iOS releases that killed us, right? Because it's like, okay, I want to get these templates out, but if I was able to do this out of band, you would have them like that, right?
Yeah. And you'd go, okay, just redo your build process, and it'll pull down the new templates, and you're good to go.
So right? This is the meat of kind of how that worked. I put it in the meetup. So if you want to look at it, and that's the location of the file. So I can probably the git clone. So I have the if env RubyMotion template override. I could put that around the entire thing instead, to where it doesn't clone. It just basically says, whatever you have there.
Yeah.
Cool. But yeah, like if you want to change it locally, you can just comment out that line. No. But yeah. Any recommendations you have, I'll change it. It's not a big deal.
Yeah, no, I mean, for me, I'm probably good. I just think of,
I know,
you'll have the people that are wonderfully happy with pulling these things down automatically, and then you'll have the people where that'll happen to them, and then they'll freak out.
Yeah.
You did what?
Yeah, and then it's in the change log. Come to the Slack channel, yell at me, and we'll talk about it and figure out how we can fix it.
Yeah. Well, it's the same thing as, I mean, using the Xcode select tool, right? It's like, that's why I don't turn on automatic updates. And so I'd go and I'd run the Xcode update I think it ran once without, it got bundled in with the OS, and it was like, what are you doing? Oh no.
But that file path that I gave you, that's a great file to just get familiar with in general.
Yeah.
And I'll add, Andrew, you were mentioning like you don't want to maintain the template in two places. This is one of those. This is the file that will change to allow basically an alias to a GitHub repo and pulling that metadata down, so that we don't have to have it in two places like you were mentioning for Red Potion. So what would get the pull request for the actual RubyMotion /templates repo would just be a metadata.yaml file that points to where it really comes from, right? So, and then that's what would get accepted into this repo. So when they pull down, then they do motion create dash dash list, they would get that discoverability without the duplication. So.
Cool.
So, Andrew, are you thinking of digging in more with your UI definition?
I wasn't trying to shut it down. I was just saying that Ruby's awesome and use Ruby. Right.
Well, it's a way of looking at it, though, and it becomes, you know, I'll tell you straight up, it was something that I struggled with a bit. I really like MotionKit. I'm just not really too sure. I'm sure MotionKit will be around and it will still continue to work. But if that's what I was looking at, if the direction is flow, then I should invest in flow, right? If the direction is not flow for everything, then I sort of have to evaluate, you know, do I use flow for if I'm doing a cross-platform? You know, where do I invest my time and my learning in? And I was looking at digging around with various constraint language things, because the one that you quoted with the name of which I don't have off the top of my head, which interestingly enough was one of the top 5 CocoaPods I saw on a list. Somebody had
Masonry.
Masonry, right? Which reinvigorated some of my interest in it. I looked at the docs and I was looking at it and it's like, well, and somebody wrote up a thing on a very simple, a tiny DSL for doing auto layout, which looked like, you know, I could write that. I'm probably sure I could convert that.
Yep.
And Hui Boon had his purplish layout, which is very similar, which he's since, I guess he's, like he was using it, I think, for a long time, but he's moved on to this thing called Xi.
Okay.
ZHI that he built, which is a Swift library, I think. But it's sort of like an extension of those ideas, which is very similar to like the minimal DSL. All of them look interesting, but all of them are very Apple-centric.
Yes. So the whole, I know I've probably said this before, but yeah, the whole cross-platform thing, if you're going for monetization, iOS first. Like there's no, right? So I understand the flow aspect of it. I understand the cross-platform story, and that's one of the, unfortunately, from my perspective, that's one of the demoware stories that are told, right? Oh, we can do cross-platform. It's like, well, you don't want to take that overhead if you don't need to, right? And then if you're going for reach, it's very unlikely that you want to do any kind of native stuff, right? If you have a business app, and it just doesn't make a lot of sense to do that. So if you're going for monetization, going to Android just doesn't make sense unless you're targeting Korea. And if you're going for reach, native doesn't make sense. And that's just the nature of the situation.
Well, depending on who's paying you for what, right? I mean, if somebody's paying you to build native for both, then you're going to look at the most cost-effective way of doing that by giving them. Now, if they want more than just the web app, I don't like the idea of just wrapping the web app myself. I think native is a better experience, right? I think.
Yep.
But I understand why you would just wrap the web app.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. It's yeah, from a business standpoint, you know, it is the most it's the fastest to market. It lets you get your feedback immediately. It lets you measure immediately, and then you iterate from there, right? And I understand that there'll be companies that go, oh, we want double native. And it's like, is that really what you want? Like, what are your hard long-term goals, right? What are you trying to do?
Yeah.
And I understand. I understand what you're saying.
Well, it's a matter of balancing, you know, here's what it will cost you. I've had these discussions,
exactly, right?
Architecture with people. I mean, architecture is really about trade-offs. You want this? Well, here's what it costs you here, right? Exactly. You want to go this way. You want to, a lot of people don't realize that when they're building a Rails app, adding an API to that app is often very simple, which gives you the ability to build a native app that talks to the API.
Right.
Now, depending on how complex your API is, or how complex the actual user interface is, that may be just as good as trying to wrap the web app.
Right.
Some people make the UI of the web app, they overcook it, right? We can do the latest React thing. Yeah, or you could just use HTML with a little bit of JavaScript and build an app that works. And there's a whole bunch of that. I don't know, Andrew. I take it you're building web apps in your day job, sort of.
Web apps and hybrid apps.
Yeah.
Yep.
That are mostly JavaScript framework driven.
Yeah.
Yep. But on the topic of like templating or like UI building, I think there's also like ultimately the whole goal of this experiment was to use ERB. It wasn't to use any other kind of templating, whatever. It was, I want to be able to evaluate ERB at runtime, which means I have to create an executable template to do that. And anyway, on the topic of templating, it seems like there's also some value, some advantage to having even if you're going iOS first, working with a platform agnostic,
having a
templating library that's easy to use and easy to remember the syntax for.
Yeah, I'm all for saying I'm all for not the crap that you see in auto layout, right? I'm all for not doing that, and making sane templates or sane APIs. Sorry.
Yeah, with any of it, right? It's a matter of if you've got a big library of code that you've got a bunch of people maintaining that you're all working on, you can develop something that works for the team, and it may be different than what's out there, but it works for the team and it makes the team better. And then people that come on the team learn it, and that's what they use. I've been on teams that did that. One of the things from Rails was, you just use this gem or you just use that gem, and that's in the JavaScript too. Although I did read that Medium article where the guy said, all I need to do to scrape all the passwords from your site is add this to an NPM. Did you guys see that Medium? Yeah. It's like,
I saw a headline. I didn't actually read the article.
You should read it. It's like, I'm not saying I did this, but if I created a little utility gem and then posted a pull request to one of the gems or one of the NPM modules that gets used all the place, and add it to that, and it includes this bit of malicious code, he says, because you all actually review all of the pull requests and all of the modules, you review all the code. Yep. And he said, I could scrape, hundreds of thousands of usernames and passwords and credit card numbers, a day, just by putting it up and posting this into the main NPM repos. And it's like, ooh, that sounds scary. He says, but I didn't do it. And you're going, really? But there's that aspect of, do we just use somebody else's code, or do we trust it? And, your time to market, all those sorts of considerations come into it, right? The kind of app that you're building, right? You know, if you're using a whole bunch of gems or NPM modules or whatnot, you know, you run that risk of, you know, is this thing actually valid, or is it shipping off information someplace else that I don't know about? So, you know, what are the dependencies on that? So sometimes you need to weigh that. So building something like that isn't necessarily a bad thing. And processing ERB is, you know, learning how to do that is cool.
Yeah, it's lots of fun.
When you build a Rails generator, so, you know, in Rails itself, when you have a different ERB file and you do the render partial, stuff like that, the main ERB doesn't do that.
Okay.
So in the generator that I was working on, I actually had to include different partials depending on, actually it was a self-including partial, a recursive partial that so I actually had to implement my own render command for doing that inside the generator to make it work. So, so then I had to learn how to pass all the context through the, it's kind of cool, right? But it wasn't all that hard to do. It was just, found something on Stack Overflow. There it was, right? But yeah, I don't know if you've done that or tried anything with that, Andrew. That's where your stuff gets real funky.
I mean, essentially, that's the render function I'm trying to come up with is, well, it's the building and compiling the ERB HTML template into some Ruby code. That's the hard part. So
if you had a render inside, the thing that renders the ERB, the class that does the rendering, if it has a render, like if you code up a method, I think it has to be a public method, because when you pass the context of that to the ERB to build, it has access to any of the methods in the class that you're passing. That's actually how you can do that render partial thing. So then you just have to come up with how you figure out where the partial files are and stuff like that. If you want to do that, Andrew, and you're playing with it and you get to that, just send me a note and I can point you at the code or add you to my repo where I'm doing that sort of thing that might help you through it.
Mm-hmm. Well, the first step is just getting the
yeah.
so you can write a single line of ERB. Which, and also the problem is I can't use any existing ERB template.
No, any of the ERB
processing
renderers,
because it all assumes that you're evaluating it at runtime in order to generate a really long string.
Yeah.
And in this case, I don't want to evaluate the ERB now. I want to wait and transform the other stuff, the HTML. Yeah. Placeholders for the actual Ruby code.
Yeah. All right, gentlemen. It's I guess 10:25 over here, so it'll be near 11 o'clock for me soon. About 40-ish minutes. So I'll probably have to log off before my wife yells at me.
Oh, shit, one quick question, Amir.
I love my wife. She is so awesome.
No. I get the wife yelling at you part, right?
She kindly tells me that it's late.
It's time to stop. Yeah.
And to get off my computer.
What kind of keyboard is it? What's the make?
It's a Kawaii.
Kawaii? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, this the Kawaii, I forgot what it is, ES1110. So the action's really good, and it's got Bluetooth MIDI on top of that.
Bluetooth MIDI?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so it's funny to set it up. It says, press the C and D key, and then use this And then when you get the password, these are your numbers. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm wiring a keyboard up with. Yeah, it was fun.
Do you play much, or like are you self-taught? You're a keyboardist, a pianist, or
I was a percussionist back in high school.
okay.
So through high school, so like marimba, xylophone, I can read
Okay.
music, all that other stuff. And of course, if there was ever a piano piece, we didn't have a piano player, so the percussionist had to
okay.
play the piano. And the funny thing was that we can't read bass clef, so it's like everything was treble clef. So I'd play the right hand, and then I'd have another person play the left hand, and he'd write the notes in bass clef. So yeah, we went to UL competitions where we would have two people at a keyboard, and the people were like, "What the hell's going on?" I'm playing one hand with two hands, and then so yeah, I decided to pick it back up and said, like, you know what, I'm gonna learn how to play with my left hand and see how it goes.
I'm a bass player, so I didn't go to university for it, but I studied music fairly seriously, and so actually for a while, I actually played in an amateur symphony as an adult.
That's cool.
I haven't done that in a few years, so I play string bass and then electric bass. And I started out playing electric bass, right? So that was my bar thing. That's why I have the mic. I still have my amps. I still have my brother was in the band with me, so I've got a Hammond L series organ and a Jupiter 4. I don't know if you know what that is.
No.
So really old synthesizers. He had a mini
It was a synth. Got it.
This is what amazes me, right? So I mean, GarageBand, when I first started playing with it, it's like, oh, this is so cool, right? Because for us, in the late 70s and early 80s, they finally came out with a 4-track cassette recorder. So remember cassette tapes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what it did is you could actually record 4 tracks on it. This thing cost you $750.
Wow.
In $1980, right? So
yeah, I mean, that's expensive.
Doing multi-track recording, well, the synthesizers that you get, now I can buy one that does most of the stuff that'll go as a plug-in into either Logic or GarageBand. Mm-hmm. But there was one called the Synclavier, which is what Peter Gabriel used on the Unnamed album, the one with Games Without Frontiers and all that. So a Synclavier cost $27,000 in 1980. Yeah, I can buy this now for GarageBand for $100.
$149.
And it sounds the same. It is like, oh my god.
Yeah, I'm saying right now, $149.
Yeah.
Pretty awesome.
So they cost more than my parents' house did. That synthesizer, right? You buy a car for $6,000. A new car, not not a Ford Fairlane, right? Like, but anyways, yeah. So that was cool seeing your setup. That was.
Yeah.
Question I had to ask. Andrew, you're a musician as well, aren't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was also a percussionist through high school, and went to college. Actually, went to college for graphic design. Well, we didn't really have drumline in our school or marching band or anything, but
yeah.
Second year of college, I switched majors and was a music major. Studied jazz drum set, and thought I was going to.
Yeah, I can't play drum set to save my life, but when it comes to like snare and tenor and quints and all the super technical just single drum things I can do. But yeah, I can't get my left foot to time with my right foot if you held a gun to my head. So drum set is not my thing.
So I play clarinet as well. So I read both treble clef and bass clef.
That's cool.
But I have difficulty when it's on a piano, coordinating the hands between which one is doing which.
Yeah, so I lucked out from the percussionist, so I do have the dexterity and the ambidextrousness of my hands,
Yeah.
which is great. It's just the bass clef part. It's like I'm getting better, right? I've got some key markers. I was like, oh yeah, 2 steps down. I can remember that, but yeah. Well being, guys.
Well, thanks for meeting for this meetup.
And of course, next month I'll have some more updates. Hopefully by then the press release will be out, and I'll share any news or updates that come from that. I'm also going to, after the press release, reach out to Ruby Weekly, and then do that similar press release there, and get some stuff going. So at least that's the plan for this month.
Good stuff. I noticed on the general channel in the Slack that a student is getting to use RubyMotion for his mobile project.
Wow, I did not see that. That's awesome.
He just posted it while we were on the air here.
Okay, cool.
So
that's great. Yeah, and I'm excited. I'm excited to collaborate with organizations that I really care about.
Cool.
Yep. Cool.
I think I'm good for making next month, guys. So I'm hopeful I'll see you then.
All right. See y'all. Bye.